And we're going to be talking about the Fight for 15 that is really gearing up. We're going to have Rokana on tomorrow to talk about what's happening with the Fight for 15 on the Hill. But today we're going to have Dr. Walks, the former D.C. Public Health Commissioner, on with us today, along with Dr. Deborah Holden, to talk about the new push to get children vaccinated. Yeah, exactly. I mean, is that a good idea? How do people feel about it? They've not, really done trials with children.
No, they haven't checked the efficacy, and sometimes, injections, meds that are used for adults aren't necessarily good for kids.
Well, the thing is, look, they don't even listen to these parents who have questions. I was at the doctor not too long ago, and I was getting, I think it was the dentist, I was getting some medicine, and they wanted to know if I took Tylenol, ibuprofen, or aspirin.
Hey, Tom. Okay, so I called you a couple weeks ago.
Because if I took either, I couldn't. One meant that I couldn't take one medicine. The other one meant that I couldn't take the other. So I put it in my mind. I asked my doctor, my dentist. I said, so I should always ask this question. She said, absolutely. Always let people know, even what aspirin you're taking. Are you taking ibuprofen? Are you taking Tylenol? Are you taking Aleve? Because it does make a difference. You have contraindications, right? And this is the only. With these vaccines, you're called an anti-vaxxer if you have a question about how this works.
You simply want to be informed.
And the thing is, you are criminalized. But it's interesting, as much as they talk about vaccine hesitancy, and I'm going to ask them about this, it turns out that the most hesitant to take the vaccines are white Republicans. So there's a lot to talk. And I don't have a problem with it. And for it to be politicized instead of they say trust the science. Well, it's scientific to ask questions, right? So it's like, let me ask the question. Let me ask the question. Which people don't want to. They don't want you to ask the questions, and that makes people suspicious. So anyway, let me say hello to Daryl. Praise the Lord. How you doing? Amen, Francis. Michael Ann, how you doing? Good morning, my original star. Carol out there in L.A. That's right. L.A. is in the house. Beverly Hills specifically. Is it Yilma? How are you? Yilma, where are you? Let me know where you are. Luciana, where are you? Buenos dias. How you doing? Gary. I want to use your music, Mr. Sounds of Blackness. 50 years of Sounds of Blackness. Don't you all want to use Gary? If he gives me permission, written permission, I can use the Sounds of Blackness music on this show. Wouldn't you like to hear that?
And supporting normal blood pressure.
Oh my gosh!
Absolutely.
Come on now. I was one of the first people when you all were signed to Jam and Lewis's record label, Perspective Records. My girlfriends and I were among the first to get your records. How about that? Sandra was one of the legal counsels for Steve Ross at times.
Could you have the guest talk with on the Facebook?
It's a game. Okay, now you all need to game because I needed to replug. So Gary Hines, I need to speak with you today so I can get written permission to use your music.
This word progressive.
This is Gary Hines of Sounds of Blackness, everybody. Give him some love. 50 years of Sounds of Blackness. Can you believe it? We love you, Gary.
Wow.
Barbara Jean, yeah. Well, they were already established.
Okay, I can hear her now. Just could you have them say one more thing, like hello, Santita or something?
Okay. Can you all speak to me, please?
Maria, I just wanted to mention that Trump and his wife got their vaccine in January before they left.
Well, that's one of the headlines.
So here are ways to stay in contact.
Okay, I can hear him now.
That was a surprise.
I'm not really
Why
that
is it a
surprised.
surprise?
On social media, dedicate a song
He was
on the radio.
pushing the
If you
vaccine.
have symptoms of
No,
fever
I don't think
or
he
cough,
wasn't. He's
shortness of
questioned.
breath,
He's
call
always
your healthcare
questioned
provider before
the
going to
safety
their
of
office.
vaccines.
For more info, visit
So people have
coronavirus.gov.
mislabeled him,
Let's
as
all
they
do our
do
part,
people.
because we're all
They've
hashtag
called him an
alone
anti-vaxxer
together.
because he would
Brought
dare
to you by
question
the
the
Ad
safety
Council.
of vaccines.
The history of Air America.
And I don't have a problem with him at questioning the safety of vaccines. Just answer the question already, right? Just answer the question.
Right.
So just answer the question. So anyway, So I'm not surprised by it, but I can also see him.
Reverend Thurston's here.
Okay, thank you. I can also
6
see
minutes.
him being thank you. I can also see him being quiet about it because you are very clear that that's why they're using high-profile, trusted Black people to get vaccines because they know that they will influence Black people. The fact is, Black hesitancy toward vaccines has dropped dramatically because some of the most prominent people in our community have gotten the vaccines. He's probably not willing to do that with his people. I can appreciate that too. Him getting the vaccine, my father getting the vaccine has not moved me on getting the vaccine. I respect his decision, but I'm not there yet. Boom. How about
It's just that
that?
it's an oxymoron because he was fighting the mask, but he goes on quietly and gets vaccinated.
Again, I
It's
think
just
that's
that he's all over the place.
no, I think that's a very personal decision. We have never talked to him about his stance on vaccines because when he talked about vaccines and questioned their safety when he first ran in 2015, the media and the pharmaceutical industry jumped all over him and called him an anti-vaxxer, and he had to back up.
The governor planted an unwanted kiss on her cheek. And I don't have an issue with him questioning the vaccine, but where he went on about not wearing the mask when it's shown that the mask has helped to a certain degree, it's propelling this thought that, oh, well, okay, I'm not going to wear a mask either.
Fauci did the same thing. And Fauci's opinion on science, I would trust more than the president's.
Today for the first time.
Right.
I mean, the fact is, Bob
Woodward
knew. This is one of the most trusted journalists in all of journalism. He knew. He took down the president. He said nothing. So all these people.
Yeah, he should have said something.
All these people. So I'm saying, let's not cherry pick. Look at everybody. That's my point. But I love you. I'm going to let you all go. Let me bring up Reverend Thurston. Love you, Marty. Love you, Maria. Let's come on up, everybody. Everybody, like and share, and please go on over to my YouTube page, The Santita Jackson Show. The Santita Jackson Show. I need you to like and subscribe, Willie, Barbara Jean, Luciana, and everybody. Let me know where you all are. Okay. Gary, I love you. I love you, my king. I need to speak with you because I want to get your music on my show. Reverend Thurston, I've got Gary Hines looking at us today from up in Minneapolis.
Volvo says
From
there's
Sounds
no
of Blackness.
future for the gas-powered
we
car.
love
By
Sounds of
2030,
Blackness. Oh,
it says
yes.
it will make
That's
only electric vehicles.
quality music.
Oh,
The production of all cars
you
with
know, and it
internal
said so much
combustion
about
engines.
Jimmy
Volvo
Jam
was founded
and
in
Terry Lewis that they
1927.
chose to
I'm
make
Rita
them
Foley,
their
18
first
News.
release on Perspective Records.
20
I
a.m.
miss Perspective
WCPT
Records because they had,
Low
Mint
Springs,
Condition,
and
Low Key. They had some
streaming
great
worldwide
acts.
at
Oh my gosh, I
Yeah,
have all their
yeah.
stuff.
It was quality.
Yeah, it was quality, and it was really the finest of, I think, the Black record tradition, where you had clean music that was the highest quality. They respected artists.
Yes.
I
Yes.
love Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis for that. They have my everlasting respect. And of course, you get the breadth and depth and scope and the excellence of our music from Sounds of Blackness. It doesn't get any better than that. And as soon as he gives me written permission, I can use them on my show. Hello. I love you, Gary. Well, we've been talking about it, but but he's so hard to catch because they're in demand. But how are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing.
Oh, bless your heart. Saw you with your horse trainer on Instagram.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to get on the
2 minutes.
Baby, I'm allergic, so that's a no to the half. Seriously, the dander. I mean, oh my gosh, I dated a guy who was so sweet. When I lived in New York, he said, he surprised me. We had this wonderful evening, and he took me on a ride in Central Park. We were going from one destination to the next on the horses. Baby, now we ended up at Lenox Hill Hospital. Oh my gosh, and I was like, I couldn't, and my inhalers wouldn't do it. He's long married now, wonderful person. We have laughed about. He said, I can't laugh about it because that was one of the most frightening moments of my life. He said, I just had a flash
Minute.
of your mama and your daddy She's what? In the. And that's what I also liked him like, because he was like thinking about your mother, what she would say to me. He was like, now your father's look would have been, oh yeah.
Yeah, that look.
That look.
That would have did it all.
You know how these mamas are. You know how my mama is. Like,
Yeah.
Does learning a language feel like this? No habla
He would have been
español.
nailed to a cross for it.
oh, well, my father would have done that.
When you
Like,
learn a
you mean to
language,
tell
you want
me
to
that you
actually
had my
use it.
daughter?
Babbel is designed with that goal in mind.
Since my husband
And
is from
she's allergic
Guatemala,
to the
I'll
dander?
apply what I've learned in Babbel to our real life situation.
Oh my God.
30 seconds.
Thank you so much.
Learn things that you will actually need.
All right, so
Babbel,
everybody,
language
let's
for
get
life,
to
celebrating
it.
10 million subscriptions sold. Now try Babbel for free at babbel.com. That's babbel.com. BABBEL.com.
You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter. This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021. Sending special love to my AM 950 radio family. Gary Hines of Sounds of Blackness. That's right, 50 years. We thank you for all of the great music that you've given us. And we're going to have them. They're going to be featured on this show. Thank goodness, because I have permission from Gary. Love you. WCBT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station. These are my homes. And on Facebook, on the Santita Jackson and Friends page, meet the Morning Stars over there. That's right, Bab and Michael Ann and Kevin and Luciana and Barbara Bacon and Francis and Shirley from Philadelphia and Daryl and so many of you there. I'm so glad. Carol Saskin and Bab getting up on the left coast. We just love you so much and thank you for being with us. Call us or text us at 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. You can also see us on the Santita Jackson Show channel on YouTube. So please, everyone, even if you just hop over there for a minute, like and subscribe. We're trying to build up those numbers. And I need your help to make that happen. Hope that you had a wonderful evening. We got a lot to talk about today on the Santita Jackson Show. Meet me over on Twitter at Santita J and at the Santita J Show. Meet me and become my friend. We're going to be talking about, continuing to talk about the fight for 15. We're going to talk about vaccines. That's right. Now, Dr. Fauci is talking about vaccinating children in elementary school. What do you think about that? We're going to talk with Dr. Deborah Verholden and Dr. Ivan Walks, the former DC Public Health Commissioner, about that. And I want to hear from you. What are you thinking, feeling about that? And did you know that the voter suppression is alive and well? They are passing laws all over the country in 43 of the 50 states to make it harder to vote. So we're going to talk about that because 2022 is on, everybody. Let us be very, very clear. We had a great time last month on January 20th, but other people have been plotting and planning. You could see that from CPAC, the thousands of people who went into Florida for that convention. So everybody, we got a lot of work to do. A lot of work that is yet ahead. So we're going to be talking about that today. And let's get to some of these headlines on the Santita Jackson Show. Chicago, we're going to have a high of 43 degrees, sunny. Minneapolis, St. Paul, a high of 45 degrees and sunny. The Dow closed up, wow, gangbusters, more than 603 points they gained yesterday. The NASDAQ up 396 points. The S&P 500 up 90 points. What a great day for them, everybody. We're going to have John Nichols, of course, with us today as well. Dr. Fauci says that the U.S. must stick with the two-shot strategy for Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna vaccines. The government's top infectious disease expert yesterday, according to this Washington Post report, reiterated that the United States will stick to a plan to inoculate tens of millions of Americans with 2 doses of coronavirus vaccine, as calls mount to protect more people by letting them get 1 shot now. He said there's risks on either side. We're telling people 2 shots is what you do, and then we say, "Oops, we changed our mind." I think we would be messaging. That would be a messaging challenge, to say the least. All right. In the meantime, he's also, according to this ProPublica report, vaccines for kids as young as first graders could be authorized by September. What do you think about that? Fauci said we're in the process of starting clinical trials in what we call age de-escalation. Where do you where you do a clinical trial with people 16 to 12, then 12 to 9, then 9 to 6. When asked what was the youngest group that might be authorized for the vaccine by September, he said, I would think by the time we get to the school opening, we will likely be able to get people who come into the first grade. Call me, text me, 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. Let me know what you think. GWC Injury Lawyers gives you the opportunity to text at that number. Everybody, did you know this? Donald and Melania Trump quietly got COVID vaccines last month. They received the COVID vaccine before leaving the White House, according to multiple news sources. Citing unnamed advisors, the New York Times, the CNN, and other outlets reported that while other officials, including Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the former Vice President Mike Pence, chose to get their shots publicly to encourage confidence in the vaccines, the Trumps opted to quietly get vaccinated in January. There was no detail on which shot they received or how many doses they had been given. What do you think about that? I'm of a few minds about that. We've been talking about that today, and so I want to hear what you think about it. Let me know. In the meantime, we hear a lot about vaccine hesitancy in the Black community, but did you know that the least likely to want the coronavirus vaccine are not Black people? No, it's white Republicans. That's right. According to this Axios report, vaccine hesitancy is higher among white Republicans than any other demographic group, and it hasn't been improving much as the vaccination effort continues. 41% of Republicans say they don't plan to get a vaccine if it's available to them. Only 33% say they do plan to get vaccinated. 70% of Democrats, though, and a plurality of independents, 47, say they plan to get vaccinated. White Americans are now less likely than Black and Latino Americans to say they plan to get the vaccine. Have you ever heard that? It's real, everybody. It's very, very real. So, and the reluctance to get the vaccine has been falling. Those numbers have fallen dramatically in the Black community. So, something to think about. But I tell you where it's not falling: in the military. 1/3 of America's troops are refusing to take the vaccine. Do you think that hearing that President Trump has gotten it might change their minds? Well, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. In the meantime, Bernie Sanders is urging the Senate to ignore the parliamentarian and to force the vote on the $15 minimum wage amendment. What do you think about that? Call me, text me, 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. In the meantime, as we look at what's happening in Texas, that they now have an economic crisis, they have an ecological crisis, they have a public water crisis, they have a public health crisis. Guess what? In Jackson, Mississippi, and we haven't talked about what's happening in Oklahoma and Arkansas and Kansas and Mississippi, they have been without running water for 2 weeks with no end in sight. Now, Jackson, Mississippi, of course, is the capital of Mississippi. What do you think about that? They've had no running water for 2 weeks, everybody. Wow. So let's think about that. Let me get some good news from the good Reverend, the teaching pastor of the Salem Baptist Church, the House of Hope, the author of Mirror Moments. My dear, dear friend, my brother beloved, my baby brother, of course, Pastor Stephen Thurston. How you doing?
Hey, big sister. Good to hear your voice today.
Always good to hear your voice. I need some good news. Boy, oh boy, because every time I go to bed and I set up all these headlines, they change like in the middle of the night, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That can be nerve-wracking. So much is changing around us for people. But here's my good news today. It's super simple. You have a right to say no. I want to challenge people to start using that word, that 2-letter word that's so powerful, because many of us, Santita, have a disease to please. And I want us to have a vaccine today to help us with this particular disease. So I'm going to give you a vaccine today. It's for free. So I wonder if I'm talking to anybody today that's listening in that's wanted to say no to someone when something was presented to you, but you felt you couldn't because and so you ended up saying yes, only to later on that day or just a few minutes after saying yes, you resented the requester or your decision. Even while you're doing what you don't want to do, there's resentment building up on the inside of you. And I'm sure that many of us can raise our hand and say, yep, that's been me several times throughout probably the course of this past month. Well, I want you to know you're not alone, because many of us have trouble saying no, especially when it comes down to family, friends, our boss, or even in the church world, saying no to our pastor. And while our insides are screaming no, a yes, some kind of way just eases its way from our mouth, because we don't want to be viewed as being non-compliant or selfish or lazy, or not being a team player by uttering that important word no. And then as a result, we find ourselves feeling overwhelmed, stressed, frustrated, under pressure, and drowning in the expectations of other people. Well, I want to give us some liberating news, give us that vaccine today, and remind us that we can still be a great person or a kind person or a generous person and still say no. I want somebody listening in to realize that saying no to people doesn't always have to be hurtful, but it can actually be helpful, not just for you, but for the other person as well. We've got to remember that we have a right to say no, especially when you know that it's the right answer. So I don't want anybody leaving from my moments of sharing today ever feeling bullied into saying yes, because what's most important isn't actually the no, but when we say it, where we say it, how we say it, our tone, our timing. That's important. And your rationale, that matters. The game changers in how your no is going to be received, and it's going to help you as you continue to say no or get comfortable saying no, in building your confidence and your comfortability in future expressions of no. So let me give us 5 tips that help us with saying no without feeling guilty afterwards. Number 1, I want us to notice our no's. Notice our no's, because we actually say no all the time. It's actually more frequent and more common than saying yes if you pay attention to yourself. So stop focusing in on those few times when things went left after giving a no, and pay more attention to the majority of the time where your no went right. And as you express no more often, again, you'll develop some healthier boundaries, because it's easier to make a decision and you're less likely to cave in when you have strong boundaries. Second thing I want us to do is to buy time. You don't always have to give an immediate response when someone puts something in front of you. Learn to insert time in between their request and your answer. You'll feel more in control after a few successful runs of this. Number 3, develop a policy. This has been my trick, Santita. I've developed a policy. And so someone will present something to me, inquire of me to do something, and I'll respond, sorry, I have a policy about such and such, especially when it comes down to, can you loan me some money? Well, see, I have a policy about lending money. And when I frame it that way, my no comes across less personal, as the policy adds weight and seriousness to my no. Number 4, make a counteroffer. This is if you want to do it, but you want to do it on different terms. So you may simply need to modify the request to meet your conditions. And then number 5, be a broken record. Repeat your same words and don't get pulled into them trying to alter your thinking or negotiate a yes out of you. I'll sound redundant because you keep asking me the same question a different way, and I'm smart enough to pick up on it. And so I'm going to keep using my same way that I told you no the first time. By the 5th time you've asked me that same question. So here it is, I'm closing. Say no to others without feeling guilty about it starts with saying no to ourselves. That's a whole nother conversation for another time, but it's important that we learn how to say no to ourselves first. It makes it easier to say no to others when we really don't feel compelled to move in the direction that they're asking us to. This inability to say no to self, it's a key factor in why we have an inability to say no to others. So let me encourage you to say no to some things so that you can ultimately say yes to better things. That's my word of encouragement for the day.
Amen to that. I mean, and that is very, very timely in a time in which we are being herded one way or another to do various things. That's always been the case, as you've shown us. But now it's becoming very, very clear we're not allowed to ask questions in a society in which we say that we pride ourselves on thinking freely, speaking freely. That's not true.
Yes.
It's not true.
Yes.
And so having a policy, before this happens, I need you to do this. You're right. It's not personal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not personal. Wow.
Not at all.
Mirror Moments is his book. You need to get it because it will help you to look at yourself. One of the things I love about Pastor Thurston, he's a teaching pastor at the Salem Baptist Church. And, of course, that is also the House of Hope. When can we hear you preach again at Salem, at the House of Hope?
Yes, I'll be preaching again on the third Sunday. I'll take a couple of Sundays off. But third Sunday is next time I'll be up to encourage and empower and enlighten people. And they can catch us on YouTube, Facebook, our stream via our website, salemchicago.org. Or if you're in Chicago, WJYS. We're live on Sundays and Wednesdays.
Sundays and Wednesdays. When will you be preaching again on Wednesdays, teaching on Wednesdays?
I'm taking Wednesday off for a little bit,
Okay.
so I'll just be focused in on Sundays.
Okay, fantastic. Fantastic. And so, just send that to me so we can let everybody know when you can.
Awesome.
Let me tell you something. If you haven't heard him preach, as Aretha Franklin said of the great Donald Parson, don't die first. Love it, love it, love it.
Thank you, Santita.
From his grandfather to his father to himself. What great preaching family and a great serving family. That's one of the things that we love about all of the Thurstons. Boy, baby. To my Uncle Stephen, to my baby brother Stephen, sending you much love, my baby. I love you. I love you.
Love you too.
All right, everybody, let's get to some COVID-19 news. We're going to have Dr. Ivan Walks on, the former D.C. Public Health Commissioner. But of course, we have our own Public Health Commissioner here, Dr. Deborah Holden, Associate Dean of Public Health at Michigan State University. And before we go to this question of the day, as we ask about vaccinating children and some other questions that you all have had, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Deborah Holden, backed you up. He said, wait a minute. We can't change in the midstream. He said we must stick with the two-shot strategy for Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna vaccines. He said changing the messaging will be a problem. What do you think about that?
A lot of his colleagues weren't on that. A lot of his colleagues were saying, well, it's better than none, and we should go with one. And I told you, I felt very betrayed by that. I didn't feel like it was appropriate because the reality of it is the clinical trials were based on the two shots, and even though they started backpedaling and trying to say the numbers were better than they thought and all of that, I thought this is why you people have no credibility, because you talk out of both sides of your mouth. So I'm glad that Dr. Fauci did that. But even more important, Kizzmekia Corbett did it. Kizzmekia Corbett came out and said, we have a protocol. That protocol works. We shouldn't be messing with that protocol. So I think actually she had a big hand, and why folks like Fauci changed their tune and stopped trying to convince people that you can get half or one dose and be okay.
And of course,
so yeah,
Dr.
Corbett did that.
Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, of course, one of the developers of the Moderna vaccine, is it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, really, what she is she's one of the people also who have worked on this mRNA vaccine technology.
Okay. And one of the
and
things,
the Moderna vaccine.
absolutely. Yeah. But one of what we have to look at with her is also that she is very connected to the Black community and understands our thinking, and that's why you saw her social media activity last summer, in which she questioned why the numbers of infection and death were so high in the Black community, and she was speaking of genocide. I mean, she just really speaks to a lot of our own issues. And so, that's important to note. And so I want to hear from you, everybody. Hear from you, please. Call us at 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. We're going to be talking with Dr. Deborah Holden, your COVID-19 questions, but there's a question of the day that we're asking about. We're going to bring on Dr. Ivan Walks in just a few minutes, the former D.C. Public Health Commissioner, about vaccinating children. What do you think about vaccinating someone as young as 6? Are you comfortable with that? Are you? Let me know. Let us know. Call us, text us at 773-763-9278. I think we have Dr. Walks on with us a little early. How you doing, Dr. Walks?
I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. And of course, we have your dear friend. We're all virtual friends, right? In COVID, but it's like we know each other, feeling each other. Dr. Deborah
Absolutely.
Holden. And so, and before we go to this break, very quickly, are you surprised? First, you, Dr. Furholden. I got a couple of minutes before I go, so a minute for you, Dr. Furholden, and a minute for you, Dr. Walks. Are you surprised that former President Trump and former First Lady Melania Trump were vaccinated just before they left the White House? Dr. Deborah Furholden.
No, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And it's the same thing I've been telling people. If you had an opportunity to get the vaccine, get it. And people say, well, which one should I get, Doc? I say, well, most people won't have that option. And basically what we have available to us in the U.S. is comparable in effectiveness. So take what you can get. So it would not surprise me that two smart people took what they could get on their way out the door. So that was a smart move, in my opinion.
So take what you can get, even though the Johnson & Johnson vaccine does not have the same level of efficacy as Pfizer and Moderna?
Yep. And here's why I say that. Because it's way better, substantially better than not having any protection. And hovering around 80%, that's extraordinary compared to the unnecessary death and morbidity that we're seeing from the coronavirus. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all. It's not like we're talking about some very low effectiveness where the potential risk, if people start to weigh them out, outweighed by the benefits. That's not the case. 75-80% protection against severe illness could be life-saving for many people.
So it's higher So it's higher than the 66% that I've been reading.
That's what we think, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Walks, got a minute before we go to break? Are you surprised that the former president and the former first lady, were vaccinated?
No, sadly, not surprised, but very disappointed that they decided not to tell anyone, because it's so consistent with what they do. They say, well, it's okay, don't worry about it. But when they get it, there are treatments that aren't available to other people. And then the vaccine's not available to other people, and it's all a waste of time. But we're going to get it secretly because, as Dr. Deborah just said, we're smart and we know what to do. I'm just so glad that they are less and less leading people, because they are just leading people on a path to destruction. But enough about them. Just let them do what they're going to do. Anybody who's paying attention knows that you can't listen to them. You can't follow what they say publicly. And then later on, we find out that, they were really sicker than they said. They got the vaccine. It's just bad. It's just bad.
I just had to ask. Let's talk about children and vaccines in just a few minutes on the Santita Jackson Show.
The history of Air America lives here. This is WCPT.
How are you, Dr. Walks?
Chicago's
I am doing very well. How are you?
It's great hearing your
Attorney
voice.
Hoffler should know.
I'm sorry?
With diabetes is a
Attorney Hoffler should know.
Okay, great. I need you to bring down the radio station just a bit. Okay?
The new way to
Just not that low. I need to make sure that we're still there.
I know I need to turn it off to cycle it through a different feed.
Thank you so much. Attorney C.K. Hoffler.
Good morning, Santita and everyone else. How are you?
And we've got Dr. Ivan Walks, former D.C. Public Health Commissioner. We have a soft spot for D.C. Deborah's from D.C. We went to school in D.C. Everybody kind of claims D.C. D.C. is, it feels like home. And my sister, she has basically moved back to D.C. So, but she went to high school in Washington. So she, her formative time, and even my brother Yusuf and Jesse, because they went to high school in Washington, they have another kind of relationship with DC. And like I have the same relationship with New York, because I lived there, and like a big chunk of my close friends are still there. When I get to New York, I'm like, hey, I'm home. Boom. Oh, I got a social life. Okay, where are we going to meet for dinner? Boom, all of that. Yeah. But it's I brought attorney C.K. Hoffler on because I want to look at also the legal ramifications, right? Because there are a lot of parents who have pushback, who have reluctance. I don't have children, but I've got godchildren. I've got nieces and nephews. They are understandably reluctant to have their children take all kinds of different medicines. And maybe because I also, my mother was also very, very careful about what we took and what she allowed us to take and what she supplemented our diets with. Looking back, I'm very grateful for that. Um, and so, I wanted to talk about that because, we can get the vaccine. That's free and that's great. But the driver of bankruptcies in the I'm hearing something in the background, everybody. Okay. The driver of bankruptcies in the United States, medical bills. So if you get COVID-19, you still have to pay for it. And I'm just I'm wondering, as kids are being, as we're reopening the country, even as the numbers are falling, you've got this head of the CDC saying, wait a minute, don't move too fast. As the numbers are falling, people are still going to be infected. And they still have to pay for the treatment. And I'm wondering, I think that's something we've got to explore as well. And that can be a legal issue. It can be litigious as people go back into the workplace and go to school. So, but I'm glad to have all of you here today. And of course, everybody, attorney C.K. Hoffler's radio show on WAOK is at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. That's 10 o'clock this morning, Central Standard Time, which means that is 8 a.m. for you, Bab, and Carol out there on the left coast.
1 minute.
So you want to get all of your legal questions answered, by this brilliant, brilliant people's attorney. That's what we call her. And thank you. I got permission. I'm going to send you my email, Gary Hines of Sounds of Blackness, so that you can send. He's texted me permission. I'm going to have you send me an email because I love it. Because we're going to use Sounds of Blackness music. I have to get special permission, written permission, from the owners of the music, and so I'm going to have Sounds of Blackness. Love it, yay! Ooh ooh. So we're coming right back up. Excuse me. Thank you, everybody.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter. This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021. WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Call us or text us at 773-763. WCPT, 773-763-9278. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so let's bring that down. Okay, great. And I want to hear from you. GWC and Free Lawyers gives you the opportunity to text. Still getting some feedback, Dylan. Okay. So everybody, let's talk about these vaccines. 773-763-9278. Want to hear what your thoughts are about children being vaccinated. Indeed, Dr. Fauci said, I'm still getting feedback. Okay. I'm still hearing myself. Okay. We're in the process, Dr. Fauci said, of starting clinical trials in what we call age de-escalation, where you do a clinical trial with people 16 to 12, then 12 to 9, then 9 to 6. When asked what was the youngest age group that might be authorized for the vaccine by September, he said, quote, I would think by the time we get to school opening, we likely will be able to get people who come into the first grade. So what do you think about that? They're now looking at vaccinating people who are immunosuppressed, women who are pregnant. I mean, all of these categories that just a few months ago, certainly within the past year, it was suggested that you not get vaccinated. Well, now the doors have been opened. We've been living with vaccines for a few months now. So let's talk about this. I want to hear from you. And of course, we've got this all-star panel because there our legal ramifications, not just medical, but this public health. There are a lot of things that we need to touch. So, of course, Dr. Deborah Holden, Associate Dean of Public Health at Michigan State University, straight out of Johns Hopkins University, and of course, the former DC Public Health Commissioner, Dr. Ivan Walks, dear friend, family member of the show now. You've been here too much not to be family. And of course, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, the president of the National Bar Association, the largest and oldest black bar association in the world. She's also chair of Rainbow Push, and she has her own radio show, everybody. She debuted last week to much fanfare down in Atlanta, WAOK. So at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time today, 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and 8 a.m. for you, Carol and Bab out on the left coast, and Michael Ann, okay, I think it might be 9 a.m. for you. Join her on her show on WAOK. What do you make of this, Dr. Deborah Holden, opening the door to vaccinating children, having clinical trials with children, say going from, what did he say, from 16 to 12, 12 to 9, and then from 9 to 6?
Well, I think that would be predictable, right? Most of us receive our vaccinations in childhood. Remember, the whole goal with herd immunity is to protect people from getting sick in the first place, right? I hear people say all the time, oh, I'll just wait for herd immunity. And I'm like, what does that mean? The goal with herd immunity is not for people to get sick and deal with whatever consequences they have and then recover. The goal is to prevent people from getting sick in the first place. So making sure that children and the youngest among us and the most vulnerable among us, people with compromised immune systems, the people who are elderly or, have other health conditions. That will always be a priority. So it's not a surprise to me that you will see the age continually get younger and younger until we have a safe vaccine ready for use in children. That's how our health system works. It's a primary prevention strategy.
Okay, and I want to hear from you, everybody. Let me know what you think. Does that make you feel comfortable? I spoke with some people. I try to ask people about different topics before I present them to the show. And, I heard it was like a mixed bag, a mixed reaction. So it's very, very interesting. Dr. Walks.
Yes, ma'am. So this issue of vaccinating children is a very important one because there's so much misinformation about children. We hear on the one hand that children don't particularly spread the vaccine, and so schools are safer when kids are in school. And so you would ask, well, then, if kids don't spread the vaccine so much, if we vaccinate the adults, why do we need to vaccinate the kids? It sounds like it's sort of a discontinuity of information. And even with that, though, we have to remember, if we really are talking about getting to herd immunity, which basically means that the virus has no place to spread because everybody's already immune. That's kind of what that means. The virus is trying to find a place to spread. It can't live outside of people, and all the people are protected, so the virus kind of just goes away. Kids and immunity. Here's something to remember. Every time we touch our community, we touch disparity. So we're looking at the fact that kids do get really sick from COVID. Most of them know the number of kids that die from COVID by percentage, very, very low. But when you look at kids that get really, really sick with this thing called multi-system inflammatory disease, it's a huge problem. Children die from that. About 2,000 cases, 37% of those 2,000 cases Latino, 32% of those 2,000 cases African American. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. We're not represented that high in the population, but our kids are represented that high with severe disease. And so this is where we have to be very careful about looking at the overall statistics and, oh, it's really rare and all of that, because in our community, there are disparities. In illness, there are disparities. In death, there are disparities. And so we have to look very carefully at the numbers that impact us in our community and make those decisions along with our healthcare professionals about whether we are going to go down that road. But yeah, it's not unusual, as Dr. Deborah said, that you begin to look at younger and younger groups when you find something is safe for adults.
Well, in fact, Linear Bob says on on the YouTube page, I think that testing the vaccines on progressively younger people makes sense. I expect that knowing it is safe for younger people means eventually this will be similar to our annual flu shots. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, Dr. Walks, because there's data according to this Guardian article on long haulers of COVID, that with children that they're seeing more children who are long haulers who actually have lingering symptoms of COVID after they survive about with COVID-19. Attorney C.K. Hoffler, what about parents who would be resistant? I mean, we now are looking at really moving back to um, reopening the country. What about parents who might be resistant and parents who might not be able to use? Well, let me just ask you, let me back up. The religious exemption. What do you think? Where are we with this?
Well, I think this is very complicated. For one, I am a parent, but my children are 16 and 18. So I think they're different. To me, at least my 18-year-old is an adult for purposes of the vaccination. But my 16-year-old, at least there have been some clinical trials, as I understand it, and Dr. Deborah Verholm can confirm that, on, I think, 16-year-olds and above, some, very limited. But the grave concern that I have is that we just don't have enough data. And so just as early on, we didn't have a lot of data that we knew as it related to the vaccinations, and now we have much more data. I just have concerns when I'm thinking of children going back to school and being vaccinated so soon without the clinical trials, and we've been told they haven't been clinical trials. That's how I feel on the one hand. On the other hand, however, I do feel that schools are a cesspool of germs, and I just think that it's very, very difficult, even under the best of circumstances, to realistically believe that we will continue to be able to to have kids social distance, to wear the mask. I just think that is not realistic either. So as Dr. Deborah Verholden said, some immunization is better than nothing. And it is the some better than nothing, I think, that's going to be the prevailing view. But let's say you're a parent and you don't want your child vaccinated for religious reasons and for medical reasons. I think those exemptions of the religious and medical reasons are going to fly. Those kids probably, in most instances, would not be required to take the vaccination. But the problem is they might be required to stay home and do virtual learning. And therein lies the problem. Or maybe some schools that are high tech and have a lot of resources might have isolated areas, because presumably there wouldn't be large numbers of kids that fit into that category where those children will learn. Presumably, but that would be well-funded schools that can do that. Most public schools would not be able to do that. So the question is, what legal recourse do those parents have? They shouldn't be compelled to take the vaccination, just like with other vaccinations. And I think right now it's too soon to tell if they would have any recourse, because it would be against the school. It wouldn't be against the pharmaceutical companies, those parents who refuse to allow their kids to take the vaccination. It would be against a school system that they believe have discriminated against their child and not allowing them to come back on campus to get learning because they refuse for religious or medical reasons to take the vaccination. I'm particularly sensitive for medical reasons. If you can't take it for medical reasons, that is something beyond your control. So it's unclear. And if we go with the guidelines that the EEOC gave us, guidance maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, the EEOC basically said, and this is just a guidance, that you would not be able to sue entities if they mandated that you take the vaccination, and they were focused more in an employment context, if they mandated that you take the vaccination and go back to work. So if that is instructive at all, then the parents would have less legal recourse. But right now, it's too soon to tell, because this is an emerging area of the law. Unfortunately, something bad has to happen, and that's why litigation results. But I would say that for those parents who feel that way, don't feel that there's so much despair and you have no recourse. Legal recourse cases result from people taking that bold step, saying, I know the odds are against me, but my children's interest and their protection is more important. So I'm going to go ahead and sue. And there are many lawyers that don't mind being on the front lines of what I would call more risky litigation. And when I say risky, the risk is because right now the conventional wisdom in the legal community, based on the guidelines we're receiving, is that there be limitations on parents' ability to sue. And I don't think that's right. So that's why I think we should say stay tuned on the legal rights of parents who don't want the children to take the vaccination, but they need to face the reality that their kids will more likely have to do virtual learning.
Well, where are we with this, Dr. Walks? Let me jump to you, because in Washington, D.C., we've seen movement with a bill that allows children to opens the door for children to be vaccinated without their parents' permission, children as young as 12. Where are we going with all of this, Dr. Walks?
Well, I think we have to just take a step back and look at exactly where we are, because we are not at a place yet where we have data about vaccinating children. We're at a place where the only children that are in vaccine trials are those whose parents are approving that their children can be in these trials. These are our volunteers. And so these folks want to help to answer the questions that we have. Is this safe for kids? How many kids? And there are fewer kids in the vaccine trials than we had adults in the adult trials because we have more science. So as we're following the science, as we're following data, we're understanding more. And I think it's important to understand that it isn't only about death in people with COVID. Santita, you mentioned long haulers. There are a lot of people that get nowhere near to a hospital or a ventilator that have had COVID, but have significant residual illness with COVID. And they're not on the little side scroll on CNN and MSNBC every day with how many deaths we have. These are people that aren't functioning well anymore, that have fatigue, that have all kinds of issues. And we don't know enough yet to know how many of those folks are going to be just out there for years potentially. And that includes children that have issues. So let me skip to the public health piece of this. When we mandate vaccines in public health, we mandate vaccines because we are looking for the public to be able to remain healthy from a certain condition. And so we say, look, everybody needs this. You can't come to school without this vaccine. That's typical. That's ordinary in school-age children. And then we have parents that get exemptions for appropriate medical reasons and things like that. But we are looking at the health of the public when we mandate vaccines, and we're looking at lowering risk. That's important. It's also important to note that right now, in March of 2021, there is no mandate to vaccinate children. And there's going to be a lot of discussion about when those results come back from the clinical trials, what does that mean? Does that mean that all of these scientists we talk about, Dr. Corbett, we talk about the National Medical Association, Dr. McDougall, we talk about the Black Health Trust, and Dr. Maxey, and all of these Black doctors and all these physicians of color will give an opinion and will recommend things, and then the local doctors will recommend things. So I think we have to just, again, be very careful as we're looking and watching what's going to come out and preparing ourselves that we're going to be informed and our folks are going to be informed. One last comment. Whatever all of this does, wherever we go over the next several months and the next couple of years with this, we have to be very careful to look at the outcomes in our communities. Every time we look at things, we see that we're sickest at the beginning. We die faster from this. And so even with the vaccines, is there going to be a difference in which community gets what? And then is there going to be a difference in how people survive the illness? Well, we're all going to survive. There's 100%, if you get the vaccine, nobody's going to die. Okay, but back to your point, Santita, what about the long haulers? How many of us get really, really sick, maybe can't work anymore, period, maybe have other sorts of challenges? We just have to be diligent. And that's why shows like this matter so much, Santita, because you bring people on and you force us to look at these things, and then you keep after it to make sure that we are going to get good information.
Well, I mean, because I see what I see. I have friends who've had COVID in Washington, D.C., and I have been admiring of the fact that the public health system has been to a person. They've all said, all three or four of them that I know, they've said, I got calls every day. They made sure I had my meds. They wanted to make sure that I was okay, and now I am well. I mean, they really were cared for. But I'm wondering, you are in Flint, Michigan. You've been in Flint, you've been in Baltimore, you've been in these communities, Dr. Deborah Holden, that are struggling. You know, absent COVID, they're struggling. What do you say to these parents who, as we see from this Axios report and from these various studies, that actually the most vaccine hesitant are not Black people, they're white Republicans? They've made us, and you've been talking about that, Dr. Deborah Holden. They've made Black people the face of vaccine hesitancy. And in fact, many of the places where you get the vaccines, they've dropped these vaccine sites, many of them in the Black community. But the people who are most reluctant to get the vaccine are white Republicans. Now, I don't want to politicize it because people have questions for a whole lot of reasons. I haven't gotten the vaccine yet either. So, I mean, and I'm not an anti vaxxer, I'm just waiting. That's all. Um, Dr. Deborah Holden, what do you say to because the numbers on pushback against the vaccine in the Black community are falling, and they're falling pretty dramatically, but they're holding steady in the white community. What do you make of that?
Well, I want to clarify something. They've placed a fair amount of distribution sites in Black and brown communities.
Mm-hmm.
But that does not mean that Black and brown people were the ones who got it.
Yeah.
The same thing happened here in my county. They placed the vaccine in an African American church in the middle of the city, which is 60% African American. And 95% of the people that got those 800 doses of vaccine were white. So that's an old sleight of hand trick,
Mm-hmm.
To put it in the community. But if the people at that site don't have a say in who receives it, it's a trick, right? So this is happening all over the country. You'll see images of vaccines being administered in communities. The following week, they created a site at a Hispanic Catholic church. And again, the majority of the people who got the vaccine were white. We need equity, and we need equity to be mandated. I keep telling people goodwill isn't enough. People aren't going to do the right thing just because. That's just not how our world works. Power can see nothing without a fight. And so we need a mandate for equity. And what I see, because I sit on the New York City task force, I sit on the Michigan task force, and I sit on my local Flint task force. You've got all these strong, brilliant, hardworking, grassroots, community-level people pushing a boulder uphill, working very, very hard to get this vaccine fairly and equitably injected into people's arms. And there's no federal pull. There's no pull. We've all seen the videos of wealthy people hosting vaccine parties. How did wealthy people get access to hundreds of doses of vaccine and are having parties to vaccinate their friends? How is this possible? The federal government takes receipt of all vaccines. All vaccine goes out from the federal government. How is it that not every single dose is being accounted for, or at least every vial should be accounted for? And so, I worry that the lie, right? The lie is that our problem is hesitancy. And not that we don't have some hesitancy, but that's not the problem, because we've got wait lists all over the country filled with Black and brown people who've said yes and cannot get off that wait list, are watching their white neighbors or their wealthy neighbors or their wealthier friends or their friends with more connections slide right by them, push right past their 80-year-old grandmother, push right past the 65-year-old uncle with diabetes. So hesitancy is not our problem. And this whole conversation around Tuskegee, to me, is terrible. Most Black people didn't know what Tuskegee was before now. It's been shoved down our throats. Most people did not know what Tuskegee was, nor did people understand what happened in Tuskegee. It's been shoved down our throats, and all it does is it furthers a racist narrative that Black people won't get over old stuff.
Well, but
And it's
also,
unfortunate because it's not the problem.
well, but I think also, to be fair, Black people are not treated with as much care in the medical community as we ought to be. The studies show that Black people are felt by doctors and nurses, white doctors and white nurses, not to feel pain to the extent that we do. We're not, when we're in the hospitals in pain and we're asking for pain meds, we're not given the strong pain meds. We're not given pain meds as frequently. So there's a lot going on here that we need to uncover, right, and work out.
But that's not historical. That's right now.
Yeah,
That's
but no,
right
but I'm
now.
just saying,
This is what
right
I'm
now,
saying.
that's what
To push
people
it,
are looking at. They're living right now. They're looking at that. So I mean, how do we
that's
we
exactly
power
my
through
point,
that?
Santita.
No, I think we're on the same page
So,
here. I'm just trying to put that out there.
yeah, but that's the point I'm making is it furthers racist narrative to pretend it's what happened 30, 40 years ago. When in fact, when you talk to people, they'll tell you about experiences of mistreatment or just something as simple as disrespect. Just going somewhere, showing up into a system of care and not being treated respectfully. Not being treated the same, the same as others who are showing up to get care. That stuff is happening right now, and that's way more impactful on people's choices and decisions around engaging and interacting with healthcare than things that happened 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And not that those things don't have an impact, but how do you rebuild trust? One good act at a time, consistently over time. But we can never heal. The wounds from the past can never heal because modern day wrongdoing keeps peeling off the scab. And that's what I really want people to understand. If people really forget, most Black and brown people have a story during COVID of a loved one who was sent home to die.
Yes.
There's a special we just did for CNN. It's coming out the next week. And there's three different women who all attend the same church. The one woman, her husband, went to the hospital with COVID. They were rationing beds, rationing ventilators. They said, look, you'll be fine. You're going to have to take care of yourself at home. They sent the husband home. The husband came home and gave his wife and his son COVID, continued to spiral. 3 days later, he went back into the hospital. The man died. His 30-something-year-old son died. Mm-hmm. His wife got COVID. She recovered, but now she's a refusal to take the vaccine because she wants nothing to do with the healthcare system.
Absolutely.
That not only sent her husband home to die, but sent them home to infect her and their son, and her son died as a result of it. And that's real. That just happened.
And what I'm saying is, as we go to break, because we're going to be talking about these votes, because now they are. Voter suppression is on the move in the United States, because we've talked about many African Americans could not get the test. They couldn't find out if they were positive if they had COVID-19. We've been talking about that for months, for a year, basically, because I know many people to whom that has happened. So, but there is a connection between that and was it Dr. Sims or is it Dr. Mims, the father of American gynecology and his experimentation on Black women and medical apartheid, all of that. There's a connection. But what can happen is things can be made right. But we have to be honest about the connection and how we can get past all of this. What are we going to do to get past? I mean, not just and to get through. I want to know. But you know what, Dr. Walks, I just love you. I'm so glad that you were with us today. And Dr. Deborah Holden, sending you much love. Going to give you all some closing thoughts here on Facebook. And CK, you're going to stay with us to talk about voter suppression. It's on the move, everybody. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. Hey everybody, I had a crazy moment. You see how my little my iPad popped out of the holder. Whoa, and it popped into my lap. Isn't that lovely? Yes, it did. While I was talking to you. Okay. But the thing is, we're going to have to continue to talk about that, because the fact is, white Republicans are more reluctant to take this vaccine, and they're refusing. More of them refuse to take this than anyone. And so putting a Black face on this is not true. Black and brown faces on this is not true. It's unfair. But, I think that we need to speak to all of people's issues, Dr. Furhold and Dr. Walks, Attorney Hoffler, um, because now is the opportunity, I think, for us to have equity and to have fairness in the system. And I hope one day that we will get to having a national health plan, having that discussion, because we need to have that right now. Because you cannot have this inequity in access to health care in a pandemic. I mean, while people have lost their jobs, we're living in a
Tell
depression.
us here.
Okay. So, but I want to give you all a minute before you go, Dr. Walks and Dr. Verholden. Dr. Walks, your closing thought for everybody. And thank you for being with me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. My closing thought is that in the middle of all of the unfairness, in the middle of all of the disparity, we have to encourage each other. We have when the story that Dr. Deborah Verholden just said is just so sad. And at the end of it is someone who says, "I'm not going to get the vaccine. I'm staying away from the medical system." That's the part where we have to reach out and encourage each other and say, you know what? If we stay away from the system, if we don't go and get care, if we don't insist and demand and encourage each other, then we all lose. We have to stay in there and fight and in a way that is supported, in a way that is useful. We have to record stuff with our cameras like we do when we see the police acting up. We have to take notes. We have to tell people. We have to call Attorney Hoffler and the other people like that and say, hey, look, this is going on. This is not right. So my closing thought is we have to stay in the fight. We just do. When we give up, they win, and we can't have that.
And let your church know. Let your pastor know. They're supposed to speak to this. I have several friends, Dr. Verholden, who they've said, "Oh, I know I had COVID, but I couldn't get the test." And just a year ago this time, I had white friends who got tested over and over and over again. I said, "Well, wow, in my community, that is not happening. We can't get a test." And like so many Black people, I've been touched by COVID. I didn't have it, but I certainly I've buried friends who've had it, more than a few. Goodness gracious. Dr.
Well,
Deborah Verholden, your closing thought?
what I tell people, where there is goodwill, there is a legislative way. I think it's irresponsible, unacceptable, and unfair to shift the burden of equity onto the backs of people who are already disparaged and onto the backs of the grassroots organizations and people in community who are already overburdened fighting for equity. Again, just envision a whole community pushing a boulder uphill. What would it be like to have the federal government wrap a rope around that boulder and give us some pull and say to all states, you must demonstrate that you can fairly and equitably get this into people's arms. And if you don't, you will get fewer doses of vaccine. You must have a data system in place. We have 44% missing data on race in Michigan. 0 data missing on age, less than 0.1% missing on gender. We have the capacity to collect demographic data. We chose to not collect it on race and ethnicity. So a lack of data continues to fuel the debate. They said, well, we don't really know that it's not being done inequitably because half the data is missing. But none of the data on age and almost none of the data on gender are missing. Why wouldn't they add the race and ethnicity variable to the same data system that already existed? When I say this stuff, people say, well, who's going to pay for the data system? The data system already exists. Well, why didn't they add it? Because they don't care. It's so hard for people to wrap their heads around that. But the problem is there's no mandate for it. People don't do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Goodwill is not enough. If there's a goodwill, there's a legislative way. And this needs to be legislated. So all of that good community push has some pull, and we can actually move the needle on equity. And in the absence of that, we're just talking. And I think it's unfair for people to just have to keep staying the course. And people got to stay the course. Okay, so I do understand that.
Okay, I got a minute.
We gave these people our votes. Yeah,
no,
we
2
gave
minutes.
them our votes. They owe us legislation. They owe us legislation with enforcement behind it. Real teeth in the gums of our laws for equity.
Absolutely. And the thing is, What you do is don't give your vote away, everybody. Now's the time for you to demand the payback for the vote. It's quid pro quo. That's politics. I do for you, you do for me. You do for me, I do for you. That's it. Everybody else does that. This is not personal. This is not a date. It's a destination. This ain't no love thing. This is about power and getting your piece of the pie. As the pie shrinks, but you better make sure you get your piece. Dr. Deborah Holden and Dr. Walk sending you much love. We've got these
Much love, Ben.
much love. Oh, I'm saying we got more than 100 bills that would restrict voting that are moving throughout 43 states in the United States. See, because right now the vote is on. CPAC met. Don't ignore that, everybody. They're organizing. We got to organize too. Sending you much love, Dr. Walks and Dr. Deborah Holden. Attorney Patillo and Attorney C.K. Hoffler. You all still with me?
Yes. Yes, we are. I am. Yes.
Okay. Attorney Patillo?
Good morning. Yes, ma'am.
All right. We're going to be coming up in a hot second, so you all can talk about these voter restrictions. As boy, they are plentiful, and in Georgia, y'all leading the way. I mean, it just can't stop.
Santita, we used to say all things crazy happen in Florida. Georgia has stepped up and said, no, Florida. All things crazy happen in Georgia.
No.
At least as it relates to voter suppression.
Sweet thing.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021. I'm coming to you from WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Sending much love to my Gary Hines of Sounds of Blackness from Minneapolis. 50 years. That great group, 50 years. And we're going to be playing their music on this show. He's given us permission to use it. Written permission. Yes. I'm so excited. We love the Sounds of Blackness. That's right. As long as we keep our head to the sky, we can keep on moving. That's right, everybody. We love them. I want you to meet the Morning Stars on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. We're also on Facebook. We're also streaming on Reverend Jackson's page and on my Santita Jackson landing page. Everybody, I can't take any more friends on that landing page. They top out at 5,000. That happened years ago. I need you to go to the Santita Jackson and Friends page and meet me there. That's how I can take new friends. Otherwise, they continue to kick people off the landing page. That is not good. That is not my doing. And please go to YouTube. The Santita Jackson Show. I need you to meet me there. And of course, we're streaming on at Santita J, the Santita J Show, the Santita J Show on Twitter. I'm trying to get it over on the at Santita J. We're going to keep on working on that. Chicago, we're going to have a high of 43 degrees, sunny. Oh, it's going to be balmy. I mean, above zero, everybody. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 45 degrees. Above zero, sunny. The Dow closed up 603 points yesterday. Wow, the NASDAQ closed up 396 points. The S&P 500 closed up 90 points. Of course, we're going to have John Nichols at the bottom of the hour as we talk about what's happening with the fight for 15 in Washington, D.C. We were just talking with Dr. Ivan Walks, former D.C. Public Health Commissioner, and Dr. Deborah Holden, epidemiologist, Associate Dean of Public Health, about COVID-19. It turns out that Dr. Fauci has said that the U.S. must stick with the two-shot strategy for Pfizer and BioNTech and the Moderna vaccines. He said there's risks on either side. We're telling people 2 shots is what you should do, and then we say, oops, we changed our mind. He said that would be a messaging challenge, to say the least. Stick with the 2 shots, everybody. As he also said that vaccines for kids as young as first graders could be authorized by September, as they are now going into their clinical trial phase with 16 to 12-year-olds, 12 to 9-year-olds, and then 9 to 6-year-olds, everybody. Donald and Melania Trump quietly got COVID vaccines last month before leaving the White House. Wow, citing unnamed advisors, the New York Times, CNN, and other news outlets reported that while other officials, including Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and the former Vice President Mike Pence chose to get their shots publicly. To encourage confidence in the vaccines, the Trumps opted to quietly get vaccinated in January. There was no detail on which shot they received or how many doses they were given. And this is also interesting because a lot of his constituents don't want the vax, no how, no way. We've been hearing that African Americans, black people, are the least likely to get vaccines, that we are the most vaccine hesitant, but actually that is not true. It turns out, according to this Axios report and other studies, that the most reluctant to get the vaccine are white Republicans. Did you know that? Wow, that's right. 41% of Republicans say they don't plan to get a vaccine if it's available to them. Only 33% say they do plan to get vaccinated. 70% of Democrats, however, and a plurality of independents, 47%, say they plan to get vaccinated. White Americans are now less likely than Black and Latino Americans to say they plan to get the vaccine. What do you think about that? What do you think about that? And hesitancy in the Black community continues to fall precipitously. So you tell me, what do you think about that? Black vax hesitancy is making the headlines, and everybody comes over to talk to us, but they're not talking to the people who have more numbers, a greater opportunity to spread. Um, they're the ones who are not getting the vaccine and refuse to do it. And that is your choice, but it's interesting to know. And who is leading the world in vaccinating the world? China and Russia. Their vaccines are being used all over the world, not ours. Americans are primarily vaccinating Americans. In the military, interestingly enough, 1/3 of our troops are refusing to take the vaccine. In the meantime, Senator Sanders is urging the Senate to ignore the parliamentarian and take an up or down vote on the $15 minimum wage amendment in the $1.9 trillion relief package. What do you think about that? All right, everybody, let's get right to it. 2022 and 2024 is in full effect. We are now in the midst of an election cycle. And if you don't believe it, you better pay attention to your state legislatures wherever you are, because more than 100 bills that would restrict voting are moving through state legislatures. 43 states in the United States are looking at some kind of restriction on voter on access to the vote. And in fact, we're seeing that boy oh boy, I don't know what's happening with you guys down in Georgia. C.K. Hoffler, president of the National Bar Association, and attorney Robert Patillo, uh, Southeastern Regional Director for Rainbow Push, and of course, Attorney Hoffler is the chair of Rainbow Push. But I mean, Georgia is really cracking down. You're going to require absentee voters to submit their driver's license, state ID, or a copy of their photo ID. I mean, you have come up with a whole list of ways to stop people from voting. I mean, the souls to the polls, weekend voting. We're seeing restrictions. What is going on, C.K. Hoffler?
Well, good morning again, Santita. What is going on in Georgia? A hot mess. The Secretary of State, and his office, the day after it was announced that Senator Raphael Warnock and Senator John Ossoff won the election, began working feverishly, from my standpoint, to begin to put in place a mechanism of voter suppression. What I mean by that, a mechanism and through action to make it more difficult for people to vote in Georgia, particularly for Black and brown communities to vote. As you will recall, there was a lot of vote suppression in Georgia during the presidential elections and the Senate runoff elections, but the grassroots organizations like Rainbow Push, like Transformative Justice Coalition, and like so many others mobilized in those communities. Black Voters Matter Fund worked in those communities and ensured that people were informed of their rights, arranged for transportation, arranged for people to understand the absentee ballot system, because people weren't as familiar with that on a global basis because of the pandemic. All of this was done because of the pandemic. And as a result, people were able to vote in rural areas that had not had access to voting machines or didn't even know what the process was, had never heard of absentee ballots. So all of those extraordinary efforts made a difference in the presidential elections and in the Georgia Senate runoff race. So because all eyes were on Georgia, because the stakes were very high, I believe that there's a determination to make sure that that was just a one-time bit of craziness. Because the very next day, forces were organizing to make sure that that doesn't happen again in Georgia. But I do have news for them. Just as they are organizing, so are community organizations organizing, because no matter what, now people are determined to make sure that people continue to vote in the state of Georgia. But there's so many legislative measures that are in the works. And the Secretary of State, as I said to you before on this show, Santita, people are applauding him for standing up to Donald Trump. No. We have to remember he created a scenario of voter suppression, and that he just decided that he could not follow and could not tolerate, because his family was being threatened as well. When Donald Trump called him and said, "Look, hey, we just need 11,000 votes. Can you do?" That is not showing the badge of honor. That is what the law would require. And in fact, he could have been penalized or become a problem if he had not reported that. But he is actively and aggressively, and his team, working to suppress the vote in Georgia. And it's terrible. It's horrific. And I believe it has racial animus surrounding it, because it was the black and brown votes and young folks' votes that really, really made a difference in the Senate runoff election and the presidential election. So that's what's happening in Georgia.
Robert Pacello, it's happening in Georgia. And what specifically is happening in Georgia? And we're seeing it happen all around the country. I mean, like right now.
Well, what's happening in Georgia is the same thing, as you said, that's happening around the country, which is Republicans don't like losing. And the difference between Republicans when they lose and Democrats when they lose is Democrats get out there and they register people to vote. They find new young folks. They change their messaging. They evolve. They work on social media. They knock on doors. That's what Democrats do when they lose elections in order to prepare for the next one. What Republicans do is go to the state legislatures and the local legislatures, and they change the laws to make sure that they don't lose. So what's going on in Georgia right now is an entire suite of voter suppression legislation, which has been passed through starting yesterday. And I understand, despite the fact that we were able to elect Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff, the fact that Joe Biden won the state of Georgia, the Georgia state legislature is still a constitutional majority in both the House, the Senate, and all statewide elected officials, and on the judiciary for the Republican Party. We've been experiencing Republican gerrymandering and packing of districts since 2010. And because of this, they're able to pass through basically anything that they feel like. So one of the things they've passed is getting rid of Sunday voting. Reducing the number of early voting days, requiring a photo identification in order to have an absentee ballot. Because remember, President Trump told them there was voter suppression, or there was voter fraud, so they're working to push these things through. And all of these efforts and more are being made specifically for the reason of reducing that record turnout that we had in the general election, and particularly the record turnout we had for minorities during those Senate runoff elections, because they refuse to lose. And instead of recruiting new people, they're simply going to reduce the number of people voting, and particularly the number of people who are voting against them. This is why they go after the number of voting precincts, particularly in urban areas, or go after the number of early voting days, because more African Americans use early voting than proportionally than white Americans. This is why they're going after absentee ballots that are going to go to the sick, the shut-in, and the elderly, because many of those people vote on issues like Social Security, Medicare, healthcare issues, the things that they are against. They want to ensure only the wealthy, well-to-do, and the MAGA supporters have a free and easy and fair access to the ballot, because they think tactically they're just trying to get through the next election. They're not worried about the fact they've lost almost every election in the last 30 years. They're not worried about the fact that the demographics of the state are changing. All they need to do is figure out how to skim off enough folks to win the next election so they can maintain power. And what we're going to see during this legislative session is everything from redistricting through voter suppression laws, through anything to make it more difficult for minorities and young people to vote, and it will help them win more elections. And we got to fight back against that. This is why we have to have that John Lewis Voting Rights Act on the federal level They got to push that through by hook or by crook. There's no time to tap dance around it, because if they're not able to push that through, just as we saw with Stand Your Ground laws in 2006, they started in the Deep South and then they worked their way throughout the country like wildfire. And that's part of the reason that Republicans are able to have such control of state legislatures, because they've worked for a decade on changing voting laws nationwide, while Democrats have been registering new voters and bringing new people into the party. We have a bigger tent. In the Senate, Democrats represent something like 40 million more people than Republicans, despite having the same number of senators, but they know how to work those refs.
Do we see lawsuits coming, Attorney C.K. Hoffler? And of course, everyone wants to hear your radio show on WAOK today at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You've got to listen to people, passion, and politics with Attorney C.K. Hoffler at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. And of course, Attorney Robert Patillo is on that same station, WAOK. You all have all the powerhouses on WAOK. My goodness, on Sundays from 1 to 4 Eastern Standard Time, 12 to 3 Central Standard Time. I mean, wow, you all have it going on. Is this going to become a legal fight, Attorney Hoffler?
Absolutely, it's going to become a legal fight. I would predict that those voting rights advocacy groups will file litigation just as we did. And many of us were involved in litigation in the past in the presidential election surrounding voter suppression and various forms of voter suppression. I think without a question, litigation will make a difference. But you've got to fight for people's right to vote. But no matter what the outcome of the fight, there's a determination, because I think for advocacy to be effective, you've got to have the legal component, which is in the courts. You've got to have the grassroots components, because grassroots organizations, they touch the soul of the people. They talk to the people. And even during a pandemic, many of these organizations went door to door to make sure the people were informed of their right to vote. And then the third component, we need individuals to call their senators, because the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is coming up, and we need people to impress upon the senators that this should be passed. That's critically important. But there's going to be a legal fight. And Santita, can I just say something? I just have to thank you for having me on your show as pretty much as a regular, because you have shown me how to do this radio, being a radio host on such a high, professional, elegant, and classy level. And I just want to thank you for that. And I say thank you to Robert Patillo, who, of course, paved the way at WAOK. My show is a show on law and legal, where we will look at legal questions that surround many of the issues that are plaguing our country and our communities. And today we're looking at the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and the impact in our communities by having some of the country's best, top, most visible lawyers to address some of the legal issues. Ben Crump, Lanita Baker, Jill Griggs, Maria Banjo, Chris Stewart, and Mauli Davis. And so we have that panel discussion because Santita showed me how to do a panel discussion. And so I want to thank you for that, Santita. And Robert, I'm there, your sister, at the radio station now, and I just want to thank you for paving the way.
Oh, well, thank you for paving the way. I mean, you've pushed me professionally, and personally in a good way for many, many years, and I love you, and I'm excited that that Atlanta and the world is going to get a chance to hear your voice. It does need to be amplified. That is what this platform is for, and that's what we're supposed to do for each other, because we do need to know all these things are hitting us at once, CK. Robert Patillo?
Yeah.
Because while we're looking at, Robert, CPAC happened this weekend, and CNN and MSNBC didn't even cover it. Then I saw on MSNBC last night, Brian Williams said, we watched it so you wouldn't have to. I said, now that is not the way you should do this. I don't need you to do that for me. I need you to let me see CPAC and let me make my own determination. Let me see the thousands of people who showed up at CPAC. Then when I hear that more than 100 pieces of legislation are in the pipeline in Republican-controlled legislatures in 43 of our 50 states, it makes sense to me, Robert. But when I'm turning on my favorite news channel and I don't even know that these people are meeting, that is deceptive, Robert. Something about that's not
Well,
right.
I think it comes down to editorial decision making because one of the things that led to Trump's rise back in 2016, and people can think back that far, was the amount of free media and free press that he got that started normalizing his form of crazy. I think in the 2016 election, President Trump got something like $3 billion in free media coverage. He was on every single show, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If Donald Trump sneezed, if he sent out a tweet, that was the lead story on Morning Joe. That was the lead story on every single cable network. And basically, Hillary Clinton was trying to raise and spend enough money to match what Donald Trump was getting for free. And because of that, his particular form of crazy became normalized. We got used to presidential candidates telling Obama jokes. We got used to presidential candidates accusing each other's parents of murdering Kennedy. We got used to presidential candidates calling somebody's wife ugly or calling someone little Marco. So I think when networks make the editorial decision that we're not going to broadcast this particular form of crazy, and not to mention the number of libel suits that are currently working their way through cable news networks. Lou Dobbs has been fired. Eric Bolling has been fired. My Pillow guy is being sued. Rudy Giuliani is getting sued. Fox News is getting sued for $1 billion. I think those are the things that went into their decision not to air these things, because you air this and then Dominion Voting or whoever they're talking about sues you. Donald Trump's not going to help you pay that $1 billion that you owe somebody. So I understand their decision not to air it for those reasons, because it's one thing not to air an opposing political view. It's another thing when somebody's just outright lying and saying crazy stuff that's going to get you sued.
Yeah, but you know what? It's all game. It's not crazy. It's calculation. Donald Trump is not nuts. He's calculating. He understands marketing and people. That is what he does. The fact is, at the same time that the media elevated Donald Trump, they buried Hillary Clinton, and they needed to be called to account for all of it. You didn't need to elevate him. Let him play himself out in the marketplace. You didn't need to bury her. Let her play herself out in the marketplace. I am against these editors whom we do not know making these decisions for us. They're playing a lot of games with us, and we're the ones who are getting played. Let me make the decision. I can disagree with him. I can make sense out of nonsense, or understand that when what you are calling sense is nonsense. But when these people who we don't know, it's like the parliamentarian in the Senate is telling me to take the $15 an hour minimum wage out. I don't even know who this person is. They're unelected. They're making a suggestion. The senators are acting as if this is the law. We got to do something about that. Attorney Robert Patillo, I'm sending you much love. Attorney C.K. Hoffler, today at 11 o'clock, everybody. At 11 o'clock today, you do not want to miss Attorney C.K. Hoffler on WAOK. She and Benjamin Crump and Lanita Baker, Breonna Taylor's lawyer, they are all going to be on a panel along with other lawyers talking about the George Floyd. Talk to me very quickly. I got 30 seconds, just 30. Now, you're in radio now, so you know what that is. What are you going to talk about today?
I do. So we're going to talk about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and the significance of that, and why we need to support that and the impact on our community. Why it's important to support that act.
All right. Well, I want you to come back and talk to us about that, because, we've got policing issues in Chicago and in Minneapolis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Goodness gracious. Give Attorney Baker and Attorney Crump my love. I am going to reach back out to Attorney Crump. He reached out to me. Thank you, Attorney C.K. Hoffler. I will reach out to him and get him on this show, because we got a lot to talk about. Everybody, let's talk about the fight for 15. Ro Connor's going to be on with me tomorrow. But right now, we're going to have John Nichols, as we do every Tuesday. Sending you much love, everybody. More of the Santita Jackson Show. Hey, C.K. Hoffler, thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It was a great show.
Girl,
great
please.
show. And, talking about the kids and the impact of it, this is a very, very difficult. It's going to be a very, very difficult issue. Without the clinical research, understandably, people would have hesitancy. But I do hear what Dr. Deborah Verholten says, some prevention is better than none.
But you know what they're not talking about here? what they're doing in England and what they're doing in Europe. I told you several of my friends who have family who are still in Europe. One in particular called me because his family are in the German parliament. He said, look, are you taking vitamin D? And this he called me like maybe a couple of months ago. I said, yeah. He said, no, I mean, are you taking enough vitamin D every day? He said, because now the research, the data has come out of Europe that shows that the people who die from COVID-19, the people who struggle with COVID-19, because COVID-19 is a disease, coronavirus is the disease, is the virus that gives that to you. He said, it's the vitamin D deficiency. He said, so please, and he's someone who's going to get a vaccine. He said, but I want you to be clear on that. You have a white conservative MP, Minister of Parliament, I think David Davis in England. They now are sending vitamin D to people in the UK, in Great Britain.
Yep.
Specifically in Great Britain.
And we know that is one of the greatest challenges for the African American community. Vitamin D deficiency is significant, and I just don't hear enough dialogue about that. For a period of time, people were talking about it, and then they went to something else.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, just talk about it. Put all this stuff out there, and that's not a conspiracy, please. It's just insulting to me. It's insulting to not put all this stuff out here. We need to hear it. But I got John Nichols here, and I'm going to be listening to your show today. Okay. Hello. You know I am.
Thank you. And have a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you
absolutely.
So much,
Absolutely. Dad, give him a call today because he comes home. Yay.
I know. I'm so excited. I will call him.
Very excited. I'll be able to hug my daddy. Can't wait. Attorney Patello sending you much love. John Nichols, how you doing?
Thank you.
Thank you, sweetie. Thank you. Thank you.
I am very well. I am glad to be with you, my friend.
Oh, I'm glad to be with you. We were talking about all these. We'll have to talk about that another time. Ro Connor's going to be on the show tomorrow. We've been talking about these.
Yeah, well, Ro, what are you talking about with him?
Oh, please. You know the fight for 15. You know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, he's got his hand in so many things right now, all of them good.
I'm going to start there.
Many topics here. He's been great, by the way, on a very important issue that goes to the heart of a lot of the stuff that we're concerned about. On President Biden doing the bombing on Syria and Iran, and saying, no, we can't have another administration that just starts bombing things without coming to Congress.
Well,
and that's the right thing to say.
And that's a big deal. Because, I mean, please, even Donald Trump was able to get points on that this weekend at CPAC. Broken records can be right twice a day.
Or maybe once a day with Trump.
Well, that's all right.
But no, the thing of it is that Ro Connor's really on a good streak, if you will, for lack of a better term. He on issue after issue, he's been stepping up. He's got this great letter to the Biden administration saying, hey, don't fall for this. Hold firm on 15, which is really good. And Ilhan Omar has been very good on this too. So there's these new representatives. Many of them are doing the exact job that they should do. We should be glad they're there.
Right.
Well, I want to start there.
This is
all right.
the Santita Jackson Show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021. It's the bottom of the hour, so you know what time it is. It's John Nichols' time from The Nation magazine. You got to get his book, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. You have got to get this book. This progressive movement is much bigger than we even know. Older, longer, and one person carries the baton for however many legs they carry the baton, and then it just continues to be handed off. And it's a very, very exciting thing. We're going to be talking about this fight for 15 with John Nichols. I mean, because now we're seeing that Frank Watkins, the co-author of the book, A More Perfect Union, he co-authored it with Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., A More Perfect Union, Advancing New American Rights. He said, look, this needs to go to a vote. You need to get people on record on how they're going to vote on moving the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour, which is where it's been since 2009, to $15 an hour. Even though Robert Reich said, look, if our minimum wage kept pace with productivity, we'd be at $24 an hour. And he's not alone. Many economists say that. So let's get to it, because Bernie Sanders he's a pit bull. John Nichols, he won't let this go. He said, look, take it to a vote. We can't pay attention to this parliamentarian. What say you?
I agree with Bernie Sanders. Look, the fact of the matter is, if we had kept pace with productivity and inflation over the last, 25, 50 years, actually, the unemployment, going off in too many directions. If we had kept pace with productivity and inflation on minimum wage increases, we'd be at about $24 an hour, not at $7.25, $24 an hour. Now, we didn't do that at all. We're at $7.25 an hour. There are those who are saying, well, maybe we could increase it by a couple bucks, or by, go to 9 or 10 or something like that. No, $15 an hour is a compromise already. That's the compromise. And instead of, backing off that and negotiating down from that, no, we should be really firm. We should be absolutely clear that we need a $15 an hour wage now, because that's the baseline. That's the beginning point, not the end of things, but the beginning point for getting people out of poverty. And so where Bernie Sanders is going on this is exactly the right place. This is saying, let's draw the line in the sand. Let's just say this parliamentarian, God bless her, more power to her. She's got her right to look at the rules, and I understand that. That's what they do. But she wasn't elected. The Senate doesn't have to accept that decision. It is just a recommendation. And as Bernie Sanders is saying, it's nonsensical to take a recommendation from a staffer and then say, well, that overrules what all of the elected officials want to do. It overrules what the president of the United States wants to do. It overrules what senators want to do. That's just wrong. That's not the way to govern. It's not the way to govern from an economic standpoint, because clearly we need to raise these wages. It is not the way to govern from a moral standpoint, because nobody should work 40 hours a week and live in poverty. And it is not the way to govern from a political standpoint, because politically, if we don't provide a fair wage, right, if that doesn't come out of this change, this election of Democratic president, Democratic Senate, Democratic House, we don't make that change, then I promise you, it will come back to haunt. And the question will be, what's the point of electing a new administration if you don't get fair wages and a better life?
What should happen here? I mean, because you hear that Vice President Harris has the power to commit to a certain path and force this vote. You've got Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders, saying, "Look, force the vote." You have others who are saying, "But we don't want to sacrifice the $1.9 trillion relief that we have just for this vote." But isn't it kind of, since this is a relief package and not a stimulus package, as I was corrected yesterday, this is a relief package. Isn't it all kind of in the same basket, John?
In my view, it is. Look, here's the bottom line. I think we're making it too complicated.
Okay.
I think we're saying,
okay, no, wait. Why are you saying we're making it too complicated? Now help me with that.
Well, no, it's not you are. It's just all of us.
No. I'm not taking it personally. I'm just saying, help me with that. I mean, because I need you to break it down for us.
Well, we're saying, that we have to sacrifice aid to cities and aid to states, which is something we desperately need, in order to get a minimum wage. No, that's ridiculous. You don't have to do that. You can do both. We're saying, oh, you can't, this might weaken our ability to get the vaccines out if we say, no, we're going to hold firm on 15. Why is that the case? Because if you start to fall into that trap of saying, well, we can't do this because it might cause a problem there. We can't do that because it might cause a problem there. At the end of the day, they'll take everything out of this bill, right? Now, that's not going to happen. We have some sense of where things are going. But you understand what I mean? It's once we start compromising away something because we say, well, if we keep that in, we won't get the rest of it. Where does that compromise end? The answer is that when Mitch McConnell was there, he was saying no to everything, right? He was saying no to aid to the cities. He was saying no to all this stuff. And it was a disastrous situation. Look, we went from the spring until winter without getting pandemic relief that we needed at a very critical time. And a big part of that was we were saying, well, we have to keep compromising. We have to keep compromising. No. The simple answer to all of this, we get beyond all the complexity, is this bill, this $1.9 trillion bill, is a compromise. It's a compromise bill. And so let's pass this compromise, because it doesn't have $24 an hour minimum wage in it. It doesn't have the full $2,000. It's got $1,400 to go with the $600 before. And some of that is means tested, which means a lot of folks aren't going to get it. It doesn't completely bail out our cities or our states. It doesn't do everything that has to be done. In fact, there's a general acceptance that there will probably have to be another stimulus and or relief bill later this year. And so this is a compromise measure. The compromises have already been done. The negotiations have already been done. We're at the point where we need to pass it. And here's the bottom line. There are 50 Democrats and there's Vice President Kamala Harris. That's enough to pass it through the Senate as the House passed it. Now, I know you have 2 Democrats, maybe more, but certainly Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema saying, we don't know, we don't like $15 an hour. Well, this is the time when Joe Biden's supposed to earn his pay, right? He was elected, right, because he was supposedly somebody who could make it happen, right? He knew his way around Washington. And I'll remind you that back in 1964, 1965, when they were talking about Medicare and Medicaid, things that we today love, right? But in those days were called radical. Barry Goldwater and other people were saying this is going too far. Ronald Reagan was saying this is going too far. So at that point, they had a close vote in the Senate. They had Southern Democrats, conservative Southern Democrats, segregationist Democrats, who were saying, I don't know about this Medicare and Medicaid. I'm not sure. I don't really like this. And then on the day of the vote, they voted for it. They asked one of them, I think it was Senator Smathers from Florida, why'd you vote for it? You were so critical. And he said, Lyndon told me to do it.
He told me to.
Lyndon Johnson told me to do it. Now, I don't know if Biden's going to quite have the Lyndon Johnson power, but what I'm saying is that's what he ought to try to do. He ought to, that's what he was elected to do. That's what Kamala Harris was elected to do. They were elected to govern. And if Democrats, their own Democrats, get in the way of governing, they were elected to talk to them, pressure them, negotiate with them, and make it happen. But don't let $15 an hour be pushed aside just because there are some Democrats who are resistant to it. And certainly don't do it because you think there's any kind of way to compromise with the Republicans.
What is the political price that Democrats could pay if they don't push for this? I mean, because we already know, according to these polls, that Senator Sanders is really the most popular figure in the party. This bulldog who's pushing. What price will be paid or could be paid? Or do you think the Democrats might not pay any price?
I think there could be a price. It won't be merely from this, but it will be from sort of a pattern of things that start to add up. Remember, let's look at some of the things that we've seen just in the last few days. You had the report on the killing of the journalist Khashoggi from Saudi Arabia that clearly pointed the finger at Saudi Arabia and clearly called for action against the guilty parties there. And the United States, should have taken much bolder steps, but we didn't. We sort of pulled back a little bit from that. We didn't quite go as firm as we should have. And then, obviously we've got this 15 thing, and then we have, one thing after another. It won't be an individual item. It will be at a certain point, people say, hey, didn't we elect these people to do this, right? Fill in the blanks, right? There's maybe a whole list of them. And at that point, some folks, not all folks, I understand that, but some folks will say, I'm just not satisfied. I'm not getting what I want here. I'm not getting what I need here. And it's especially true on the economics. And if you don't deliver on some of the real progress that is needed, in my opinion, on economic, social, and racial justice, saving the planet, moving us toward peace, you run the risk of a disappointment factor, right? You run the risk of people, a drop-off in turnout. Now, that drop-off in turnout will not occur in 2024. If Donald Trump is the president of the Republican, or nominee of the Republican Party again, the likelihood is that you'll be able to rally against him and perhaps, and probably beat him. But the problem is 2022. And we know that there's a drop-off in turnout in midterm elections, sadly, troublesomely. Mm-hmm. That drop-off could become a real crisis because it could end up doing what we saw in 2010, what we saw in 1994, what we saw to some extent in 1978. You get a new Democratic president, they come in with lots of promises, lots of hope, and then they don't deliver at the level that people were expecting, and you have that drop-off, and they end up losing their ability to govern, literally losing their ability to make things happen because you end up having a Mitch McConnell in charge of the Senate again.
But you know what? That is, I hear you. I mean, I'm wondering if sometimes we talk over people's heads and we don't talk to their needs. When you're talking to people who are coming to push to get diapers because they can't get Pampers, they cannot afford Pampers. People who are standing, or if they have a car, their cars are idling as there are these miles long lines to get a bag of groceries. That they might not have electricity or gas at home to cook. I mean, people, I sense another urgency, another kind of pain out here, and an anger, because people, their needs are so deep. John Nichols. I mean, people are really hurting out here. They're hurting. And they're growing more and more desperate. I shared with the audience a couple that I went out to lunch with one of my best friends a couple of days ago, my oldest friend in the world. We hadn't seen each other in a long time. So we just said, it's almost been a year. So we said, we're going to get together.
Wow.
We're going to be appropriately distanced and all of that, fist bump, even though this is my oldest friend in the world. She said, now, when I come and pick you up, I need you to be downstairs and waiting at the door. I said, okay. She said, because they're carjacking out here and I don't wait. As soon as I get to the light, I'm moving. That's what's happening out here.
Mm-hmm.
People are not going to the ATM machine because bad things are happening on the ground, and they don't even report that on the news, John. I mean, this is a little bit more than, well, academically, we can take the $15 an hour out. No. People, and it's not going to even happen overnight. It would be an incremental increase. People are desperate. What did Reverend Jackson say when he opened up his speech in 1984? Would my constituents, the damned, the dispossessed, they are desperate and they're restless and they seek relief. We've got to speak to that, John.
That's exactly right. And this is the bottom line thing. The thing that we should be thinking about all the time on this is how do we take care of people? How do we, make the circumstance one where all the problems that we know can be addressed by, focusing in on these fundamental issues are addressed. Look, I know we're not going to get everything we want. I've got a piece up today on the Nation site about all this. And one of the things I say is, look, you're going $15 is not going to get everybody out of poverty.
Yeah.
It's $15 an hour isn't going to be sufficient. It's not going to be the answer to every problem. In fact, if you're a mom with a couple kids living in San Francisco, $15 an hour isn't going to get you anywhere near where you need to be. In a lot of cities, that's true. But $15 an hour is, in a lot of America, it provides a baseline. It allows people to kind of get to a place where they need to be to survive, right? To get through this time. And it also shows a measure of respect. And let us not understand the power of that word, respect. If we respect people and their work enough, if we understand what Sherrod Brown refers to as the dignity of work, i.e., that people show up maybe before dawn, they work maybe after dark, they do everything they're asked to do. Basic respect says that you shouldn't, at the end of that week of working 40 hours, end up with a check that doesn't get you out of poverty, that leaves you, without enough money to meet your basic needs. And so this is the point at which we begin to show respect. And if we do so, if we show respect on that wage issue and on the dignity of work, then that starts to filter out, in my opinion, to a lot more of society, right? It goes beyond just some money in your pocket. Mm-hmm. It's also that people do feel a measure of hope. They feel like, okay, if I make this effort, if I put my time in here, there's something good is going to come of it. And I'm not going to be exploited, at least not at the level I have been exploited. So this is important. There's psychology here. There's emotion here. There's practicality here. There is morality here. It is immoral to ask people to work full time and live in poverty, not be able to get by. And there is politics here. And that politics, at the end of the day, I hate to say it because it should be about all those other things, but we know that elected officials often, they do respond to political pressures, to political fears and needs. And so let us just tell them the politics.
And
Democrats,
they respond. They respond. And I think I think they have been responding to the push of the progressives. Wouldn't you agree?
I think they are. I think it's much more so than we've seen in the past, right? Because look where we're at. I mean, we can be disappointed in the struggle that we're in right now and frustrated by it, without a doubt. There's no doubt of that. But let's recognize that, in the past, we got a new president. Maybe we're talking about going from 725 to 9, right? Or, maybe 10, something like that. Now we have a new president. We're talking about going to 15. I give Joe Biden a huge amount of credit, because when he put that $1.9 trillion piece of legislation down, he didn't begin with compromise. He put 15 in there. Now, I'm not so happy that they seem to be willing to let it go, or willing to sacrifice it, because of what the parliamentarian has said. But I give them credit for starting in the right place. And that tells us that our progressive push has been effective. It's gotten political leaders to know where they should go. So that's a big deal. That's progress. Now it's time to take that next step. And it is to not merely know where we should go, but in fact to go there. And to go there is harder, right? Yeah. It's not rhetorical anymore. It's practical. It's real. And that means, as Bernie Sanders says, as Ilhan Omar says, as Pramila Jayapal says, as Ro Khanna says, we're going to have to ignore the parliamentarian and simply pass the stimulus, pass the relief package in the Senate the same way it was passed in the House. They don't have to do anything radical here. This isn't complicated. All they've got to do is bring the House measure up for a vote and let people decide whether they're going to vote on what the House of Representatives has already passed. And remember, we talked before about it doesn't have to be complicated. That's the bottom line. It doesn't have to be complicated. A simple up or down vote on whether the Senate wants to do what the House has already done. Mitch McConnell didn't let us do that. And that is a mark on his record that I hope will remain there forever. It will be understood that he harmed people by not allowing the House stimulus from last spring to come up in the Senate.
Absolutely.
We have a new leader in the Senate. We have a new president. Have we changed? Can we now do what Mitch McConnell didn't allow to happen?
You know, before we go, a couple of things have happened. Before we move to our beloved Steve Cobble, someone who was just a giant in progressive politics and a giant in our lives. What a wonderful, gentle giant he was. Vernon Jordan, the former head of the Urban League, made his transition last night. Just found this out. And
oh my gosh.
yes, 85 years of age, very beloved family friend, fellow Howardite. He's someone who gave his life to the struggle, and then he moved into the corporate world. And if you wanted to move through the corporate world, if you needed advice, if you needed a seat at the table, if Black people and dispossessed people needed a seat at these corporate boards, Vernon Jordan was there. When Bill Clinton went into the White House and needed a guiding hand, Vernon Jordan was that person for him. He was a giant. He was a giant. He was a giant. He was a giant of a man. And of course, we do remember when he was shot in Indianapolis after giving a speech, a civil rights speech. And, you know, just God bless Vernon Jordan, everybody, and pray for his family, for his wife, for his beloved daughter. Pray for them. Pray for them. And wonderful book, his memoir, Vernon Can Read. But that just only tells a bit of the story. What a tremendous, tremendous giant he was. But we lost Steve Cobble. I have a couple of minutes before we go.
Yeah.
And Steve Cobble, I thank you for calling me. Ironically, my father had called him, and you know the story. His wife was holding the phone with Dad's number in it, and she had to let him know, well, Steve has left the building. I have 2 minutes. Who was Steve Cobble?
Steve Cobble was a kid from New Mexico who wanted to end the war in Vietnam. He became kind of unexpectedly, accidentally, grassroots organizer for George McGovern. The weird thing was he was also a mathematician, really good at math. He proved to be so good at doing that McGovern campaign that at the age of 20, they started to call him a genius. They said he was a political genius. He gave up math. He went into politics, but he never forgot what motivated him in the first place: stopping wars and achieving economic and social and racial justice. He, in the 1980s, was a very successful political advisor, counselor, government official in New Mexico. He made contact with a fellow named Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson recognized Steve Cobble's genius, brought him on the campaign in 1988. Steve Cobble was Jesse Jackson's delegate counter, was a critical advisor. And the fact of the matter is that if the Reverend Jesse Jackson says Steve Cobble was a giant who made that 88 campaign all of what it turned out to be. Now, obviously, the Reverend was at the head of it. So many other people contributed. But the successes of that 88 campaign in transforming the Democratic Party and putting forward fundamental issues that we continue to advance to this day, Steve Cobble was a central part of that. And his loss, we cannot begin to measure.
Incalculable. But boy, oh boy, we got to share the same time and space as Steve Cobble. What a giant, what a giant. I posted this beautiful obituary, this beautiful overview of his life written by John Nichols on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. And again, my love goes to Molly and the family. My love goes to Mrs. Vernon Jordan and his daughter Vicky today. Sending them all of my love. Two giants we have lost, but without them we would not be here. So the work continues, everybody. God bless you. I'm Santita Jackson. God bless you. Wow. I saw that someone put that on my timeline, John, and I've been like going through my phone trying to confirm it, right? And
Yeah.
then Vernon Jordan had made his transition, and yeah, he did. Well, what a life.
Wow. Wow.
What a life. What a life. These guys saw the worst and the best of America. And I just, wow. What wonderful men. And I'm so glad that I've been blessed to say that I actually knew them. I actually knew Steve Cobble. Um, and I've always connected with Steve because he and I had a similar path. I was recruited to Howard to study math, and he and I were both merit scholars. Ended up nowhere
Oh,
near
wow.
any of
Yeah.
ended up nowhere near any of that, right? So he and I would get a good laugh about it. He was like, "Yeah, you too." I said, "I'm doing nothing like that." But I guess music is oral math. It is. But
Yeah.
people don't know. I mean, there are so many people you don't know who've made these rights and these things that we can presume that we can fight for. They made these things possible. I think of Vernon Jordan getting shot in Indianapolis, Indiana, and the man who shot him actually came to Chicago to kill Reverend. And
Oh my gosh.
he cased he stayed outside of the Push building for days, about a week, but he couldn't figure out a way to shoot him and escape. And he was so frustrated, he got in his car. He heard that, when he got in his car, he heard that Vernon Jordan was going to be in Indianapolis, and he drove there. And when Vernon Jordan was shot, when they brought, and he was at the biggest event in Indianapolis that night. He was the keynote speaker. Do you know that the white staff at the hospital, and this is in 1980, they wouldn't treat him? So they had to get a black surgeon out of his bed who came to the hospital and saved his life.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Don't you tell me.
Yeah, look, but we know these stories, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
but we have to
you
tell
just told
them.
a vital one there.
No, but we have to tell them. We have to tell them.
Because it's the history that is not distant history. We have people alive who went through all of this. And that's why we pause to remember, folks.
Yeah.
Right? It's just the bottom line. It's easy to race on and say a prayer and then move to the next issue. And frankly, Steve Cobble is an example.
Yeah.
Perhaps Vernon Jordan as well, but certainly Steve Cobble would have said, "Oh, don't spend much time on me," right?
Yes.
You go talk about the next issue. Talk about the fight to stop wars, or the fight to get a $15 wage, or the fight to achieve economic and social and racial justice. Talk about whatever next. But here's the bottom line: if we don't pause to talk about those who we marched with and organized with and fought with for big goals that we didn't always achieve, if we don't talk about them, then we sort of lose a connection to what Dr. King and others would refer to as that arc of moral progress, right? Because these are the people that help to bend the arc. And we want to encourage new generations to fight to bend the arc. And one of the ways to do so is to say that if you join us now, if you fight with us now for all of these worthy and necessary goals, at the end of the day, your contribution will be remembered. We will value what you gave along the way, and we will recognize it, because we're not racing so fast that we don't notice the people who are our allies and are our visionaries and are our necessary comrades in great struggles.
Oh boy, that is it. And that's why, I think when I think of what a humble spirit these men had. I mean, Vernon Jordan was a big guy. He was like 6'4", 6'5", but so approachable, so warm, so kind. And when I think of Steve, who just he was an absolute bohemian kind of guy. And he was very, very gentle. And you never knew that he was as brilliant as he was.
That's right.
I mean,
That's right.
You never knew Steve was, because he didn't need all of that.
Donna Edwards. Oh, go ahead.
No, please, no. The Congresswoman from Maryland?
I don't want to interrupt you.
No.
Yeah, Donna Edwards said you just sparked my thinking there. Donna Edwards said a great thing the other day about Steve Cobble. And as soon as she said it, I remembered it. But she said, do you know, whenever Steve was going to say something profound, he would say, well, you know, and it would be this sort of like, oh, you know, I don't want to make a big deal here, but just, and he would always start it with, well, you know, and then he would say something that changed the whole conversation. And it was that combination of genius, which he clearly had, and gentleness. He didn't come in and say, you're wrong, or, hey, everybody, you need to listen to me now, right? I know what to do. You never heard Steve Cobble say that. What you heard Steve Cobble say, first off, he listened to everybody in the room. Mm-hmm. He was very, often very quiet. He'd often stand in the back of the room. But then at some point he would go, well, you know. And when he did, after that would come some insight about how to win an election, how to put an issue forward, how to stand strong when everybody else was saying to compromise. And over time, he lived almost 70 years. Over time, everyone who was wise figured out that when Steve Cobble said, well, you know, that was the time for the rest of us to step back and essentially get our marching orders. Mm-hmm. Not because he told us those were our marching orders, but because we knew that Steve Cobble was going to be right. He was going to understand something fundamental. Now, it might not mean that we were going to win, because Steve Cobble took on plenty of losing fights, but it did mean we would know how to stand on the right side of history and how to do so in the most effective way.
Because it's like but we lost in the short term, but we won in the long run, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, because everything.
Yeah. Well, one hopes.
Well, no, I mean, now we are talking about Israeli security and Palestinian justice. Now That's we right. are talking about a livable wage. Are we moving toward 15? Absolutely. We're going to get there, but we're going to have to get beyond there. We're talking about universal single payer. Well, we did that 40 years ago when Reverend ran. It sounded crazy. Now it's the baseline. Now, I mean, so lost those little battles, but the war, and I guess ultimately you want to stand on the right side of history. And
that's right.
And you want to model just how to be, just how to be once you get power. Because Steve was a very influential guy, and he remained very humble.
Yeah. And if we stand on the right side of history, the weird part is we get closer to having reality, right? We get closer to achieving what we're seeking to achieve. It's a very interesting measure of where victory comes, right? Does victory come on election day? Or does victory come long after election day when we've actually achieved the things we said we were going to achieve? Well, the answer, of course, is it's when you achieve the things you're going to achieve. Because if election day is the only thing that matters, right? If it's the only thing that we care about, then we're just it's just a campaigning machine, right? We're not about principles. We're not about ideals. We're not about achieving anything. So the election it's a little bit like, the first step, right? You get that done, and then you take that second step. And Steve Cobble always understood that. And it's why he would sign on as a political genius, as somebody who really did know how to do it, knew how to do the strategy. It was why he would sign on with campaigns that were unlikely to win. Mm-hmm. And you're like, whoa, come on, you could make more money. You could have more prestige. You could be on more talk shows and have podcasts and do all sorts of other things if you just, kind of went big, went with the winners, right? And Cobble would always say, well, no, I join with the person who's right, and I try to make them win, or try to help them win, rather than joining with the winner and trying to make them right.
How about that?
Pause and take that in, right? Pause and take that in. Join with the person who's right and figure out how they can win, rather than joining with the person who's likely to win and try to figure out how to make them right. To calculation that very few people in politics understand. And at the end of the day, that is why he aligned with Reverend Jackson, because Reverend Jackson was right. And
Tony
Reverend
Anaya
Jackson's genius
was right.
Yeah. And so is, and look,
Bernie Sanders.
there were so many other candidates. Bernie Sanders, Dennis Kucinich, who Steve Cobble worked with. Steve Cobble was political director for Carol Moseley Brown when she was running in that incredible 1992 Senate race, where she became the first African American woman elected to the U.S. Senate.
That's right.
It's like he chose the fights. He chose the races that were hard, and sometimes he won. Right? Sometimes the candidates he aligned with won. Tony Anaya did. Carol Moseley Brown did. Quite a few others did along the way. But sometimes they lost. And I never, ever, ever, ever heard Steve Cobble say, "Oh, I guess I made a mistake there." He never looked at it that way.
Yeah.
In fact, you and I both know that if Steve had his way, Reverend Jackson would have run again.
Oh, yes.
President.
Yes,
Steve wasn't done.
Well, he was a presumptive front runner in 92. And that was that's kind of lost on people because it's something Reverend doesn't even dwell on. I think he had gone as far as he could go in this process, and that was that. But a lot of people, were waited to endorse at the last minute. Maxine Waters, everybody, because they thought, okay, now we get 84, we doubled our vote totals in 88. We can take this in 92. So there's that. But what a giant Steve Cobble was and is and will always be. What a giant Vernon Jordan. Wow. All of these people have gone into eternity. But boy, I tell you what, they did the work. They did the work. They did the work. And I think that's important for all of us. That's why, we get up in the morning and we hit it every day here. It's about doing the work. Your final thought for all of us. There's so much that we've been talking about, John Nichols.
So much good stuff. So much important stuff. And that's why I value this show, because it brings out these conversations that are so vital. Look, we honor Steve Cobble, and that's vital. But at the end of the day, Steve Cobble, as I think Reverend Jackson, who's coming home today, and so many other people who fought these battles along the way, they would tell us to end on the issues that matter. And right now, what matters is we are struggling to make sure that the American Relief Act is everything it can and should be. In order to be everything it can and should be, it needs to include a $15 an hour minimum wage. That's not everything that we would hope for. That's not everything that we would want. But it is what we should have at this point. It is the necessary increase. And that will not be easy. We know that there's some Democrats that are resistant to it. We know that the Senate parliamentarian has said, no, we understand all the difficulties of it, but this is a right side of history moment, and there are people who are willing to fight. Bernie Sanders is willing to fight in the Senate. Ilhan Omar, Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, and others are willing to fight in the House. We've got progressives in positions of power who are raising the issue. This is the time to back them up. The Democratic president, the Democratic Senate is not imperiled by a fight for 15. It is strengthened by a fight for 15. And so this is the moment in which we take up an issue that might otherwise be abandoned, the kind of issue that in the past might have been abandoned, and we say, no more, no more. We're not going to abandon the right thing in order to score an easier victory. We're going to fight for the right thing in order to score a righteous victory.
John Nichols, everybody. The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. You've got to get that book. Subscribe to The Nation magazine. They speak to our issues. They speak for us. And we are so grateful for this iconic magazine and all that they do to really speak to the great issues of our day. and of beyond and beyond and beyond. I love you, everybody. I wish I could talk to you, Anita, but I'm going to have to run, and Howard and everybody. I've got to run, so I've got to run to another Zoom call. And thank you for your prayers. My father will be home today. I'm so grateful to God for that. These are his folks. You know, it's sobering for me to watch the people who he's walked and worked with all these years making their transitions because they've made their contributions. Now the question is, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I'm so grateful that you give me the support and the love and the encouragement that you do. John Nichols, thank you so much for being you and for being a friend, and more than that, for being a brother beloved. I always wanted a redheaded brother. Now I got one. How about that? Strawberry blonde. Love you, John.
Thank you for doing everything you do. Keep strong.
Wouldn't be able to do it without you. Thank you so much. Your encouragement has meant so much. It means so much. It means so much. Please, are you kidding me? To have someone of your stature on my show every week? Oh, hello. Love it. I love you, John.
I love you too. Keep strong.
You too. God bless. I love you, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. And tomorrow we have Ro Khanna on to talk about the Fight for 15 and these other progressive issues that he's pushing for in the Congress of the United States. We're winning every day, everybody. We really, really are. Love you, everybody. See you tomorrow.